There are moments in life when everything is decided in silence. No screams, no witnesses, no dramatic farewell. Just a door closing, footsteps fading into the dark, and a choice already made by people who claim to love you. On the night of May 1st, 2021, in a quiet corner of northern Italy, 18-year-old Saman Abbas walked away from her family home for the last time. Security cameras caught her moving beside the two people who were supposed to protect her the most. She didn't run. She didn't fight. She didn't know she was walking toward her own death. This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't a mistake. It was something colder, something planned in whispers, justified in tradition, and carried out by blood. By the time the world would learn her name, Saman Abbas was already buried, her voice erased, her fear confirmed too late. Neighbors would later say they heard nothing. The fields nearby stayed quiet, the house went dark, and the people responsible disappeared as if nothing had happened. But before she became a headline, before courtrooms and international warrants and debates about honor and freedom, Saman was just a girl trying to breathe in a life that felt like it belonged to her. To understand how that night ended the way it did, you have to go back to the beginning, to who Saman was before fear became her constant companion. And that story begins far from Italy, in a small village where obedience was taught before independence ever had a name. Saman Abbas was born on December 18, 2002, in a small village in Pakistan where life moved slowly and expectations were set early. In the Abbas household, tradition wasn't just followed, it was enforced. Girls were taught to listen before they were taught to speak, to lower their eyes before lifting their voices. Futures were planned by elders, not dreamed up by children. From the moment she could understand language, Saman learned that family honor came first, even before happiness. In 2016, when Saman was just 13, everything changed. Her parents packed their lives into suitcases and moved the family to Italy, settling in Novalara, a quiet farming town surrounded by fields and silence. For Saman, the move felt like stepping into another universe. The air smelled different. The streets were wider. The people spoke a language she didn't know, but for the first time, not knowing felt like possibility instead of punishment. School became her escape. She learned Italian quickly, absorbing it the way thirsty ground absorbs rain. Teachers noticed she was bright, curious, eager to participate. She laughed more. She asked questions. She started dressing differently, not rebelliously at first, just comfortably. Jeans instead of long dresses, her hair uncovered, small freedoms that felt enormous to her. Each one made her feel more visible, more real. But inside the Abbas home, nothing had changed. Her parents watched closely. They noticed the confidence in her posture, the way she spoke without waiting to be spoken to, the way her eyes no longer dropped automatically. What Saman saw as growth, they saw as disobedience. Italy was supposed to be a place to work, not a place to forget who they were. And as Saman grew older, and the gap between the life she lived outside and the rules waiting for her at home became impossible to ignore. By the time she reached her mid-teens, Saman was standing with one foot in freedom and the other in fear, and the people who raised her were already deciding which side she would be forced to stand on forever. In the Abbas household, conversations about the future didn't happen around the dinner table. They happened in whispers behind closed doors, between adults who believed they knew what was best. By the time Saman was 16, her parents had already begun talking about marriage. Not someday, soon. A cousin back in Pakistan had been chosen, a match approved by extended family, a solution that would restore control and preserve honor. To them, it was tradition. To Saman, it felt like a life sentence. When she first heard about it, she thought there had been a mistake. She laughed nervously, thinking it was a joke, something distant and theoretical. But the more she asked questions, the quieter her parents became. Silence was their answer. When she finally said no, clearly and without apology, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Doors closed harder. Conversations stopped mid-sentence when she entered the room. Her mother, Nasya Shaheen, stopped meeting her eyes. Her father, Shabar Abbas, spoke less but watched more. Saman tried to explain. She said she wanted to finish school. She said she wanted to choose for herself. She said she wasn't ready, and more importantly, She wasn't willing. But in that house, refusal wasn't a choice. It was a challenge. Her parents didn't argue with her logic. They questioned her loyalty. One, they told her she was forgetting where she came from, that she was embarrassing the family. Those people were talking. Each refusal hardened their resolve. What Saman saw as self-determination, they saw as rebellion. And in their eyes, rebellion required correction. The more she pushed back, the more the walls closed in. Restrictions tightened. Curfews appeared. Her phone was monitored. Her movements were questioned. Love in that house became conditional, something offered only when she complied. Saman didn't know it yet, but her refusal had crossed an invisible line. And once crossed, there was no going back to the way things had been. Outside the walls of her home, Saman Abbas allowed herself to imagine a different future. It wasn't extravagant. She didn't dream of fame or wealth. She dreamed of choice. Hana of waking up and deciding what her day would look like without fear. Of being with someone because she wanted to be, not because she was told to. That hope took shape quietly, through a phone screen, in late-night conversations that felt safe and honest. That's how she met Saqib Ayub. Their connection started casually, messages exchanged between homework and chores, but it didn't take long to deepen. With him, Saman could speak freely. She could laugh without checking who was listening. She talked about school, about wanting to work someday, about the suffocating pressure at home. Saqib listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. For Saman, that alone felt revolutionary. As their bond grew, so did her courage. She began to picture a life where love wasn't negotiated by relatives and signed away in silence. She imagined moving out, at her working, building something of her own. These thoughts gave her strength, but they also made her more visible. Her parents noticed the change. The way she smiled at her phone, the way she stayed up late, the way she protected her privacy for the first time in her life. When they found out about the relationship, their reaction was immediate and unforgiving. This wasn't just disobedience anymore. This was humiliation. A girl choosing her own partner, and worse, doing it openly. The anger in the house sharpened. Voices were raised. Accusations flew. Her parents told her this proved she had been corrupted, that Italy had ruined her, that she needed to be sent back before things went further. For Saman, the realization was devastating. Love, the thing she thought might save her, had only made her situation more dangerous. And for the first time, the fear she had been pushing down rose to the surface. She began to understand that wanting a life of her own might cost her everything. By 2020, fear had stopped being a feeling and started becoming a warning. Saman Abbas no longer argued just to be heard. She argued to survive. The tension inside her home had turned heavy and unpredictable, the kind that sits in your chest even when the room is quiet. Every conversation felt watched. Every refusal felt like a risk. She began to realize that love would not soften her family's resolve, and silence would not keep her safe. It was then that Saman did something few people her age, and even fewer in her situation, ever dared to do. She went to the authorities. Sitting across from social workers and police officers, her hands trembling in her lap, she said the words out loud. She said she feared her family would kill her if she didn't agree to the forced marriage. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't cry for sympathy. She spoke plainly, as if stating a fact she had already accepted. The system responded the way it was designed to. Social services intervened. Saman was placed in a protected shelter, away from her parents, away from the constant pressure. For the first time in months, she slept without listening for footsteps. She attended school under supervision. She spoke with counselors who encouraged her to think about her future. On paper, she was safe, but safety felt lonely. The shelter was quiet, sterile, and temporary. She missed her younger brother. She missed the idea of family, even if the reality had been painful. Part of her still believed things could change, that her parents would calm down. That time and distance would make them understand she wasn't trying to dishonor them, only to live. Against advice and against her own better instincts, Saman agreed to return home. She told herself it would be different, that now they knew the authorities were watching, they wouldn't go too far. It was a decision rooted in hope, not ignorance. But hope in this case would become the most dangerous thing she carried back with her. The final days of April 2021 carried a tension that didn't need words. Saman Abbas could feel it in the way the house went quiet when she entered a room, in the way her mother avoided her gaze, in the way her father's voice stayed calm but distant. There were no more arguments, no more threats, just an uneasy stillness that made her chest tighten. One she had learned by then that silence was never a good sign. On April 29th, surveillance cameras captured something that would later become a key piece of evidence. Saman's uncle, Danish Hasnain, along with two cousins, Ikram Ijaz and Nomanhulak, were seen walking through the fields near the family home. They carried shovels and other tools, moving with purpose, not conversation. At the time, no one noticed. To passers-by, it could have looked like farm work. To investigators later, it looked like preparation. Inside the house, Saman sensed that something was coming. She sent messages to friends and to Saqib, her words short but heavy. She said she felt watched, that her family was acting strange, that she was scared but didn't know what to do. She didn't accuse anyone directly. She didn't name her fear, but the meaning was clear. She was running out of time. On April 30th, her last full day alive, Saman moved carefully like someone trying not to trigger an invisible wire. She avoided confrontation. She stayed close to home. She checked her phone more than usual, rereading old messages, grounding herself in the knowledge that someone, somewhere, knew who she really was. That night, she barely slept. By the time May 1st arrived, Saman Abbas was standing at the edge of something she couldn't see but could feel closing in, and the people around her were already moving into position. The night of May 1st, 2021, didn't announce itself as the end. There were no raised voices, no visible struggle, no sudden chaos. Outside, the fields of Novalara were still, the air cool and heavy with the quiet of late spring. Inside the Abbas home, the lights were on, but the atmosphere felt hollow as if something essential had already left the room. Security cameras later showed Saman Abbas walking away from the house alongside her parents. She was dressed simply. No bag, no phone in her hand, just steady steps and a posture that suggested obedience, not escape. To anyone watching without context, it might have looked ordinary. A family stepping out for a walk, a conversation away from the house, nothing more. But Saman knew she wasn't safe. In her chest, fear pulsed quietly, controlled, the way it does when you don't want to provoke the people walking beside you. She had learned how to survive tense moments by staying calm, by listening more than speaking, by not asking questions that might turn into accusations. That night, she followed those rules one last time. What happened next was never seen on camera. There were no witnesses willing to speak. Investigators would later piece together what they could from evidence and circumstance. At some point, away from the house and out of sight, Saman was killed. Forensic findings would eventually reveal that her neck had been broken, consistent with strangulation. It was quick, final. She was 18 years old. When the night ended, Saman did not return home. Her room stayed untouched. Yet her belongings remained where she left them, and the silence she had feared settled in permanently. By morning, the story her family would tell the world had already been decided. When morning came and Saman Abbas didn't return, the house carried on as if nothing was wrong. Her parents claimed she had run away, that she had chosen to leave on her own, chasing a life they could no longer control. It was a convenient explanation, one that shifted responsibility away from them and placed it squarely on the girl who could no longer speak for herself. But the story didn't hold. Almost immediately, the cracks showed. Saman had left behind her documents, her clothes, and the few personal items she cherished. She had no money, no plan, no history of disappearing without warning. To investigators, it didn't look like a runaway, when it looked like a lie. Within days of her disappearance, Shabar Abbas and Natsia Shaheen vanished as well. They left Italy abruptly and fled to Pakistan, abandoning their jobs, their home, and their younger son. That move alone changed everything. Italian authorities took notice. The younger brother was placed into protective custody, separated from the very people who were now under suspicion. As news spread, attention turned to the extended family. The uncle, the cousins, the surveillance footage from the fields. What had first seemed ordinary began to look calculated. Investigators officially opened a homicide case, issuing arrest warrants and notifying international agencies. The quiet farming town of Novalara found itself at the center of an investigation that stretched far beyond its borders. Saman Abbas was now officially missing. But for those searching for her, the truth felt heavier than the words suggested, and somewhere beneath the soil, that truth was waiting to be uncovered. For more than a year, the land around Novalara was searched in fragments. Fields were scanned, old structures were examined. Tips came in, then went cold. Each passing month deepened the fear that Saman Abbas would never be found, that her disappearance would remain suspended in uncertainty. Another unresolved story whispered instead of answered. Then in November 2022, everything changed. Acting on renewed investigative leads, police returned to an area near an abandoned farmhouse not far from where Saman's father had once worked. It was a quiet place, forgotten, the kind of land no one looks at twice. Beneath the soil, investigators uncovered human remains. The confirmation came slowly, carefully, and then all at once. The body was Saman's. The discovery hit with a brutal finality. Forensic examinations confirmed what investigators had long suspected. Her neck had been broken, consistent with strangulation. The girl who had begged for protection had not run away. She had been silenced. The news spread quickly, sparking grief, anger, and a renewed demand for justice across Italy and beyond. For investigators, the search was over. For the family responsible, the ground beneath their lies had collapsed. And with Saman finally found, the case moved from suspicion to accountability. With Saman Abbas finally brought back into the light, the machinery of justice moved faster and louder. Arrest warrants that had once felt symbolic now carried real weight. And investigators laid out their case piece by piece, tracing movements, timelines, and decisions that pointed not to one impulsive act, but to a coordinated family effort. Shabar Abbas, Saman's father, was arrested in Pakistan in 2023 after months of international pressure and legal negotiations. He was extradited to Italy, returning not as a migrant worker, but as a defendant facing the most serious charge possible. Nazia Shaheen, Saman's mother, remained out of reach longer, living under the shadow of a warrant until her arrest in Pakistan in 2024. She too was extradited, forced to face the country her daughter had once hoped would protect her. The focus then widened to the extended family. Danish Hasnain, the uncle seen in surveillance footage, was arrested. So were the cousins, Ikram Ijaz and Noman Hulak, after attempting to evade authorities by moving across European borders. Each arrest added another piece to a picture that was becoming harder to deny. Inside the courtroom, the defendants denied everything. They claimed innocence, misunderstanding, coincidence. Lawyers argued over evidence, intent, and responsibility. The defense tried to fracture the story into separate acts and separate people. Prosecutors argued the opposite. This was not chaos, they said. This was planned. And the court was about to decide which version of the truth would stand. In December 2023, the first verdicts were delivered. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the sentences, each word landing heavier than the last. Shabar Abbas and Nazia Shaheen were both sentenced to life imprisonment for murder. Here, the court recognized the crime for what it was, a premeditated honor killing, a decision made not in anger, but in belief, a belief that control mattered more than a daughter's life. Saman's uncle, Danish Hasnain, was convicted and sentenced to prison, though his punishment was lighter than that of the parents. The two cousins, Ikram Ijaz and Noman Hulak, walked free. At that moment, the court ruled there was not enough evidence to convict them beyond reasonable doubt. For many watching, the outcome felt incomplete, like justice had paused halfway through the truth. The prosecution refused to let the case end there. They appealed, arguing that the earlier ruling failed to recognize the collective nature of the crime. They pointed again to the surveillance footage, the coordinated movements, the shared silence after Saman's disappearance. They argued that no one acted alone and no one should be judged alone. In April 2025, the Bologna Court of Appeals delivered its final judgment. The life sentences for Saman's parents were upheld without hesitation. Danish Hasnain's sentence was increased to 22 years. And this time, the cousins were convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment as well. The court stated clearly that Saman Abbas had been killed as part of a family decision, planned and carried out to punish her for choosing her own life. The legal battle was finally over. But outside the courtroom, The meaning of the case was only beginning to take shape. The murder of Saman Abbas did not end with a verdict. It rippled outward far beyond the courtroom walls, forcing an entire country and much of the world to confront questions many preferred to avoid. Italy erupted into conversation about honor killings, forced marriages, and the quiet spaces where cultural tradition can turn into control. People asked how a young woman could warn authorities, be placed under protection, and still be sent back to the very danger she feared. Religious leaders spoke out, publicly condemning forced marriages and distancing faith from violence. Activists pointed to Saman's case as proof that warnings must be taken seriously, even when they challenged cultural comfort. Her name became a symbol, not because she sought attention, but because her story exposed the cost of silence and hesitation. But beyond policy debates and headlines, Saman Abbas was still a girl who wanted ordinary things: freedom, love, a future she could choose for herself. She didn't die because she broke the law. She died because she tried to live honestly in a world that demanded obedience. Her life was taken by the very people meant to protect her, justified under a word that has been used for generations without question: honor. So the question lingers, long after the cameras are gone and the courtroom's empty. How many warnings go unheard? How many young voices are dismissed as rebellion instead of fear? Saman Abbas asked for help. She asked to choose her own life. And when that choice was denied, it cost her everything.